Hello, folks. My name is DC Rockwell, and this is your co-host, Elio Grieco. Welcome to Code and Chaos, a pseudo-random conversation that starts with tech and ends where it ends, about an hour or two later. Tonight, our conversation begins with autonomous vehicles, or self-driving cars, if you will. Elio, I know this is one of your most favorite types of technology out there right now. You've been speaking so highly of it. Where would you like to start?
I'd like to start with the same headline I've seen unironically printed in multiple places, that these cars will definitely have an impact on pedestrians. So
hopefully not too many impacts.
But yeah, no, this is a I can't say near and dear, but this has been on my mind for years now. So been talking about some of the overhype in AI, and this is fascinating because you take this unpredictable system that we don't really understand. There's so much we don't understand about, quote, AI and really different machine learning algorithms and their limitations. And now you put it in a life-critical situation where when it crashes, we're talking about literal crashes. We're talking about hurling flaming lithium batteries into houses. We're talking about like life and death consequences here. And it's just such a fascinating, it's the best example, or one of the, if not the best examples of tech solutionism, where we like to just throw a technological solution at a problem and not really think through the whole problem. Just be like, no, technology will totally make this better. We're sure this will make it better. There'll be no downsides. And then people are like, well, what about this downside and that downside? And honestly, I don't know if an hour is going to be long enough to go through all the downsides, but it's going to be a fun one. This will probably be a multi-parter.
Well, let's talk about the upsides first. Autonomous vehicles sound cool. They sound super cool. I mean, come on. Getting into a car saying, car, drive me where I want to go. It's like every sci-fi kid's dream, right? The only thing better than that could be a flying version of it, which I'm sure you have thoughts about.
Sure, that does a third dimension in, and oh man, does it get exciting.
Yeah. But, this has been on my mind today because today Amazon just announced their Amazon Zoox, which is, we're going to push this up on the screen for people to see. And
weird. I'm a ghost. The car hit me and I'm gone. Look at this. This is awesome. This is a great example. Of course, we're talking about autonomous vehicles and the tech is misbehaving. And the great thing is when our tech misbehaves, no one dies. It doesn't matter that all the aren't working perfectly.
Yeah.
But imagine if this was something that was tasked with keeping you on the road and keeping you, safe and keeping other people safe and alive. And it worked as well as our tech just did right there, which it will work that well, not any better, I doubt. Sobering thought.
Yeah, it was a very timely moment for us to have a tech error. I'm pretty sure you cut out, or I cut out there on the audio for just a moment. But for those of you who are listening at home, we did a scene transition. So this way we could bring up a picture of the Amazon Zoox, and looks like something went wrong with our system that we actually spent considerable time trying to make sure it works right. So I guess this is a good segue into how these engineers have spent considerable time to make sure that these self-driving cars don't malfunction, but they already have, haven't they?
Yeah. So, well, let's, I guess, before we really bash these, because, they deserve so much bashing. We're just not ready for this kind of technology. Our engineering of software is so far from being able to, there are military projects that I would trust my life with. Because they're using full formal methods to get what's called a high assurance software platform, which takes years and years of extremely rigorous testing. And if you're willing to put in insane amounts of time and money, yes, we can make stuff that is almost completely failure proof, as close as we could ever get as mere mortals. I've worked at Amazon. We're not doing, unless they've dramatically changed the way they operate over the past 10 years, it's not HA software. There's no formal analysis. Maybe some of that's starting to creep in, but I don't know. I have a hard time believing.
What is HA?
HA is high assurance software, and that's when you need to know that this is going to work right no matter what. When you're building a cruise missile or something like that, and you need to know that when you punch in a target and you say go blow this thing up, that it definitely gets to the target. If something goes wrong before it gets there, it doesn't blow up the ship before it leaves, it doesn't blow up along the way, that it definitely does exactly what you tell it to do and doesn't mess anything up and choose the wrong target and blow the wrong people or things up. That's really, really, really bad. So it's worth taking whatever precautions necessary and doing a full formal analysis of the code base and having multiple teams like look at every possible thing that could go wrong and make sure that the code, it's carefully documented that whatever goes wrong, we know exactly what will happen, and what will happen is something that is acceptable to us. It is a very slow, expensive way to build software, but it's worth it when you're talking life critical.
So in technology where it has to work all the time, it's critical that it works each and every time. We still just call it high assurance. So we put all of that time into it. We document it. We formally prove out the software, and yet things can still go wrong, can't they?
Well, there was a great example today. There's an article on, all these people talking about the tribes of software. It was just on HN, on Hacker News. And this one guy was talking about, like I've been saying, oh yeah, you can make perfect software with formal methods. And he showed this simple, what was it? It was a definition of a method, just says sub AB, A plus B, right? And he's like, could you prove that this is correct? And his buddy's like, oh yeah, totally. That's a trivial function. That'd be easy to prove it's correct. He's like, could you prove it's named properly? He's like, because like there's always a level, and anyone who's actually done high assurance software will tell you that there's a place within the code where you can, resort to really rigorous mathematics, and you can prove that the mathematics work out, but there's still an interface with the human world where you can't prove that the function's named properly with just mathematics. There's always a boundary with the real world and with other systems. And so there's like, I forget all the stuff, but there's like 12 different aspects you have to look into, and code quality and mathematically verifying the code is one of 12 areas you have to really rigorously look at for a high assurance system. So yeah, it's very slow and time consuming to build systems like this. But again, I would argue when lives are at stake, it's worthwhile to build systems like this. So this is the kind of stuff I would hope is happening in self-driving vehicles. And let's keep dodging the benefits. In theory, if we were to have a perfect self-driving vehicle, a level 5 doesn't need any help from people, it'd be amazing, right? You could get in just like public transit, which, by the way, public transit already gives you some of this. You just get in, you can screw with your phone and catch up on work the entire trip. You don't need autonomous vehicle. You just have one person drive the thing and make it high capacity, and you get some of the benefits right there. Now, in a city like Phoenix, Arizona, and the whole Phoenix metro area, which is very, very low density compared to most other major cities in the country, the downside is, if we tried to put in public transit to serve the entire metro area, we have a huge challenge because the mileage, the number of tracks you'd have to lay would be insane, because it's not like other high density cities. We're not like San Francisco and New York and Seattle, where everyone's living literally on top of each other in these massive towers. We're much more spread out. We got a little bit of that downtown in certain downtown areas in downtown Phoenix and other downtown, really most of it's downtown Phoenix. I'm trying to think of other major areas where we have a lot of towers. We're a pretty flat city. Tempe's starting to build up, but it's really hard to get enough public transit to every single house when we have so much. Just like one of my favorite fun facts about New York, I was in there and this woman's like, tell me a fun fact for my daughter. She's actually writing about Phoenix. And everyone talks about how big Central Park is. Our South Mountain Municipal Park, it's a city park, is 2 square miles larger than the entire island of Manhattan. So when we're talking about like our park is bigger than their city, and so really laying enough track, it takes you almost 3 hours to go from one end of the valley to the other at 80 miles an hour on the freeway with no stops. It's an insane amount of land. So in theory, self-driving cars would be great for this. They would really open it up. They would allow people who are not capable drivers, people who have disabilities, people who just have better stuff to do, children. They would allow everyone to really kind of democratize transportation in a city where public transit is less feasible.
And then we wouldn't also have all of these people who are having to sacrifice their own vehicles for ride share, and they wouldn't have to be out on the road and be in harm's way for their occupation, like Uber and Lyft and those, and not get paid very much for doing it.
I was going to say two ways to look at that. I mean, there's they wouldn't have to, and then there's also the traditional capitalist, well, killing jobs argument. Like supposedly those people have jobs right now, and like you pointed out, they do. They don't pay very well. They're terrible jobs, but they do technically have jobs. So,
well, that's a topic for another time. We're only here to trash on electric vehicles tonight. Yeah, so we'll get to the social implications of it, I suppose, maybe even later on here if we have time.
There's 2 new robots, by the way, for the next show. 2 new robots that are like the hardest thing to automate field work. There's a strawberry picker already. We talked about in a previous episode. Mm-hmm. There's now a tomato picking robot, and I'm trying to remember the other one, but I just added 2 more videos when I talk about disappearing jobs in some of my speeches. There's more and more robotics coming out, and I trust those a lot more than a self-driving vehicle. Those will catch on because, if the robot screws up, it squishes a tomato, whatever. It's a lot less of a problem than if it squishes a human. So,
right. So let's get back to this. I think I may have fixed our transition. Let's see.
Oh, let's see.
Oh, kind of ish. We're still on the way. But anyway, this is the Zoox, and this is what got it all started today. And they are claiming that this is a level 5 autonomous vehicle. Could you explain what level 5 means?
So I'm trying to remember all the perfect distinctions, but there's levels 1 through 5, and it basically means how autonomous. And the gist of it is level 1 is almost like cruise control or slightly better, where you still have to do most of the work, but the car will help you maintain speed or maintain distance between the car in front of you. And level 5 is that ideally the car can drive itself with no human interaction under all conditions. I find the claim of level 5 to be basically ridiculous. To me, that's a red flag. Anyone who says it's a marketing term right now, like true level 5 would be super, super, super difficult because there are so many edge cases in the real world. And it's worth mentioning that we've had some level of self-driving cars of autonomy in the past, like on freeways. There was an article from way back, I think almost the 80s or 90s. And in Europe, they fielded self-driving cars on the freeways only because freeways are very standardized. You tend not to have any pedestrians, and you tend to have all the signs look a certain way and follow certain rules. So even though you're dealing with higher speeds, the fact that the problem set is narrower makes autonomous freeway driving relatively simple. And we've seen a lot of strides with self-driving trucks in the last several years. Again, if you're on the freeway, it's a lot easier. Now, when you try to bring it down to neighborhoods where there's stuff that's not nearly as predictable, where you have a lot of different signs look different, signs get weathered or aged. I actually saw in New York, one of my fun examples, I was driving one time, came to the end of a street. Luckily, I had driven on that street before, but the 2 one-way signs were just pointing at each other. And I'm like, that's awesome. That's there's no way, like it can't be one way both ways. And what had happened was this one it wasn't on the pole tight enough. So it had spun around and it had, now they're pointing at each other. And if I didn't already know this, it's one way to the right, I might have turned down the wrong way because the signs are giving me no help. And so with a self-driving car, it may or may not have alternate sources of info and knowledge and common sense to be able to figure out which way to go. It might, hopefully, but it might not. And so who knows what it's going to do in a situation where the signs are lying to you.
Well, is this just a matter of fixing the signs up and upgrading our cities to be autonomous driving cities and upgrading our code and then maybe having inspectors that go around making sure that these routes are right and then upgrading the software so this way when you get caught in a situation like that, it sort of phones home to a seeing eye person who can be like, oh, darn, better send out the inspector, better get that fixed.
So several, 3 major issues there. So one, there was a little bit of a commotion a few years ago where that's basically what I can't remember if it was LeCun or one of the main researchers in quote AI stuff was basically like, yeah, we're just going to have to rebuild our cities a little bit and make them amenable. And it's like, well, wait a minute. Can you make a car drive itself? Because people deal with the chaos of the real world. if you're having to rewrite the city, then apparently there is an upper limit on how good you can make autonomous driving technology. If you have to modify the city, if you have to modify people's behavior, I mean, that's kind of one route, but it's kind of copping out and just saying, oh yeah, like we can't actually make this work. We're just going to teach everyone. And the problem is you have weathering, you have issues, the sign not being tightened down, you have issues with the markings on the pavement fading over time. And actually, even in Arizona, you have the pavement can basically melt in the summer, and heavy vehicles can actually do like significant damage to pavement. So you're gonna have that unless you have insane highway maintenance better than we have right now. You're always going to have to deal with errors and omissions in signage and markings. And if your car cannot be safe, even when there's little errors and omissions, there's actually a lethal Tesla accident relatively recently where there was a spot, so a gore point on a highway, when you have an exit split off, there's that little point. It's called a gore point. And there is one spot in California with a really, really, really long, shallow, normally like one curve will curve way off and the other one will go straight. And so that's the exit, and then the highway goes straight. This one, it stayed really, really straight and parallel for a really long time. And this guy had driven this section with Tesla, like with his Tesla, I can't remember which model. He had driven this several times in the preceding months, and he had put it on autopilot, and it had made the same error. And for whatever reason, he decided to trust it again. And the Tesla got into the gore point. Yeah, there you go. So this was going the opposite way if the traffic flow was reversed. And instead of a nice short gore point like that, it was a really gradual, long gore point. And so it kind of looked like a lane. And the markings were a little bit faded and dirty and everything. So the Tesla just got in the gore point. And eventually, when it did split off, there was I forget the term, I think they call it a traffic attenuator. It's those big, long sections. It's got a little metal around it, and it's a whole bunch of rubber. Sometimes you'll see barrels full of, sand or water or something. So when you hit, instead of hitting solid concrete and just dying, the idea is it dissipates the kinetic energy and it slows your car down slowly and gently enough. It's still going to wreck your car, but you won't die. It'll slow you down and, save your life. And unfortunately, someone had already slammed into that previously, and those things don't just auto reset. You got to get a crew out. You got to rebuild the thing. And it had been less than a week. And so they hadn't gotten the crew out to fix the attenuator yet. And his Tesla just snuck into there and just slammed right into this attenuator that hadn't been reset, going like 80 miles an hour. He did not make it. And that's the kind of stuff where you're going to have situations like that. Your autonomous vehicle stuff, a level 5 vehicle has to be able to handle that without killing the occupant.
So was that a level 4? That
Tesla stuff is maybe level 3, maybe. Again, we have to pull up the stuff. I can't remember the finer points of where each level cuts. But Tesla is calling it full self-driving, which is extremely disingenuous. Frankly, I think Musk should be facing some legal penalties for doing that, because their stuff, when pressed, they admit that it is nowhere near level 5, not even level 4, but they keep calling it full self-driving, which is leading the public to think that they can just like take a nap in the car. And they're literally, one of the cases recently, 2 guys in a level 5 just got charged because they had both had the seats full reclined, and the car was doing like 80 mile an hour, 70, 80 mile an hour on autonomous mode. And they're just basically sleeping. And this cop's like, this car's going with no one behind the wheel. What the heck's going on? And he pulled them over and charged them. But people are doing stupid stuff. And even the stuff that, like I said, that claims it's level 5, let's think about all of the different scenarios. So you have signs that are messed up. There's been some interesting adversarial research we should spend some time on, but not in this section, where people putting tape on the right parts of the sign, and they can make a stop sign look like a 55 mile an hour speed limit sign. So now the car is using bad information. So there's also adversarial issues. There's just weathering of street damage and weathering and garbage on the road. That's another thing that people don't talk about. If you see a bag, kind of tumbleweed style, just like a plastic bag, going across the road, doing a motion analysis, a lot of people can tell by how something's moving, not perfectly, but we can get a sense, is that something really light being pushed by the wind? Or is that something solid that's rolling because of a slope? Or, what is this? Do I need to take evasive action and steer into another lane to not slam into something solid that'll wreck my car? Or is it just a plastic bag and whatever? It'll probably just, fly around the side of the car. It's not worth dodging and risking a collision with someone in another lane. And that's something where I have not seen any convincing research that cars can estimate what they're looking at and how it's moving. And is this something lightweight that I can just, drive right into with no issue whatsoever, no damage? And like bicycles, for instance, are notorious. Like a lot of the computer vision systems are really, really stumped by bicycles. They can't tell there's a symmetry there. They can't really tell which way the bike is going. And so they don't know which way to predict, like, is it coming into my path or getting out of my path? I don't know. And some of the systems, if you look at the Uber crash that happened in Tempe, Arizona, that actually was the first death due to a self-driving vehicle. One of the problems is what order do you stack your layers? So they had a classifier that classified different things. And if you look at the accident report, it classified it like her as a bicyclist walking their bike, then as something else, then as unknown, then as something else, then as a biker, then unknown again. And it kept switching and just kind of jittering between classifications. And the problem was they didn't start establishing trajectories until the classification stabilized. Ooh. So because like a person, even if you don't know what it is, you can tell something is like moving toward your path and is going to intersect your path. Even if you don't know what it is, you still understand there's a thing that's going to intersect my path. Maybe I need to, stop or dodge, take evasive action. But the car doesn't establish a trajectory until it knows the thing is. So if it keeps switching, it just keeps switching. There's no trajectory. It doesn't know. Now, in fairness, that car, the Uber, did figure out that it did need to take evasive action at the 1.4 second before impact mark. The problem was Uber had disabled the ability for it to brake and actually take evasive action because they didn't want it to be jittery and get rear-ended by other drivers. Uber had also disabled the built-in Doppler radar safety system in the Volvo test platform that they were using that would have automatically averted a collision just using dumb, there's some object reflecting radar that's too close. We need to not hit it. So they disabled that when it was in self-driving mode. And then they also did not have any kind of indication for the safety driver. There was no little bing, they're about to hit something, pay attention. They just assumed the safety driver would be constantly paying attention and take evasive action. And if you look at the video, yeah, she looked down for a sec. We're not going to go into all the research, but basically pigeons and scavenging birds are really, really, really good at just doing a monotonous visual task. And they actually train them to search the ocean before today's software. There's a whole awesome article about how we find people lost at sea. So pigeons are amazing. You can set pigeons on a look for something without fatiguing for hours and hours and hours, and it works great. People, 10, 15 minutes, you zone out. So the idea of a safety driver even, catching on and actually grabbing the wheel and taking evasive action, that's not how human physiology works. The safety driver is just there to take the legal brunt of going to jail so that the company doesn't have to be responsible. That's literally the only purpose, because anyone who's studied human psychology, physiology in this context, safety drivers will never be helpful at all. Useless.
So death by first Z-index error, basically.
Pretty much.
Which in computer graphics, your Z-index tells you what order to draw things on the page. So it didn't know that one thing was farther away than another. And then it backed up to a safety driver. And this safety driver dropped the ball at just the right moment. Do we even know what their account was of this? Were they interviewed in any public way? Do we know anything about that?
I'm trying to remember. They did have obviously internal footage of the safety driver, and she had looked down at her phone and looked back up, and she wasn't staring at it the whole time. So honestly, she was being about as alert as one would expect a safety driver to be. Because the problem is, if you have someone in a self-driving vehicle, they're when they don't trust it, they're going to be super alert. They're going to be right there, ready to take over. But as they drive and it doesn't hit things and it doesn't hit things and it doesn't hit things, they will start to get more comfortable and they will stop. Your brain just wants to save energy. It does not want to spend its calories.
Oh, you're saying that the safety driver looked down at their phone. I thought you meant the person who got hit looked down at their phone. No,
safety driver.
Oh, well. Oh, come on,
But that's going to happen. Even if she wasn't looking at her phone, the safety driver is going to zone out. Humans are not good. they, after 10 to 15 minutes, will fatigue if there's not a heightened state of awareness where they feel like they're in danger. If they feel like everything's fine and the system's doing its job, they will zone out. This is how human physiology works. Short of using CRISPR to modify how the human body operates, the idea of a safety driver is bull crap. It doesn't work. You could have a pigeon safety driver. You could, train a pigeon to actually like peck a thing if there is a thing in the path. And they actually did that. There's a story about the software if you get lost at sea. And they initially trained pigeons to go in this little glass cage at the bottom of the airplane. And they trained them when they saw that, that bright orange all the life vests and everything, safety orange. Whenever they saw that in the ocean, they would peck a thing. They trained them, they would get food. Whenever they saw orange, peck the thing. And that way the pilots could focus on flying and, other stuff and not fatigue trying to scan the water. And the problem was the pigeons were too good. They just kept pecking. Any little bit of debris in the water, they would peck. And they were getting too many false positives. It was driving them friggin' nuts because the pigeons are so good at scanning for hours and hours on end. Their brain is optimized. Think about how they eat. They're constantly on the ground looking for what's the next little seed or morsel of food to pick up. Their brain is primed to do that visual task for hours. Ours is not.
Yeah, we're not very good to pigeons, are we? We like put them in these terrible situations and make them click on dots for us for hours on end. And sometimes we put them in the nose of missiles in order to some of the earliest, what was it? Guided missiles were a pigeon in the missile with a video screen in front of it, and they were trained to tap on the target. And it would correct itself based on where the pigeon tapped. Pigeon guided missiles. I'm not sure if those ever made it into production, but they were definitely tested. Poor pigeons.
Yeah. It's a shame their little brain works that way. It's kind of handy. And now we have computers that can do that stuff instead, thankfully. But yeah,
well, sort of.
This idea, yeah, this is true. This idea of a safety driver, though, is absurd. Like I said, it's literally just a legal scapegoat. It's a sacrificial human so that when you disable the emergency braking system, you've disabled the autonomous vehicle's ability to brake, you've done all these other stupid engineering things, you could just be like, oh, no, it was the safety driver. She shouldn't have been looking at her phone. It was her fault. And it's like, that's bull crap. You guys should have done a better job engineering your software. You shouldn't even need a safety driver if your goal is level 5. And so, come on. You're basically throwing someone under the bus so that you can keep doing your thing, and you're outsourcing your liability to someone dumb enough to sit in the seat as a safety driver. It's really disgusting. I have a huge problem with that. I think it's morally reprehensible to have someone acting as a safety driver.
Well, and also, if by the time the computer recognizes something's wrong and tells the human's reaction time, or the time to react, is probably very, very short. And we're not great at reacting in predictable ways in high stress situations. Well, so it seems like we're falling back on one of the worst possible fallback methods. There's
partly reaction time, and I believe it was Air France Flight 447. There's also context. So one of the problems with automation is automation smooths over smaller problems, and then it makes you as a human less capable of dealing with bigger problems. So in Air France 447, they had a situation where they tried to climb. The pilot was fatigued. He went to go catch some Z's. He left the co-pilot 2 things. The co-pilot was he wasn't that experienced. And he had been flying, they were flying this Airbus. I forget the model of the plane, but it's very, very automated, fly-by-wire, super technologically advanced, very easy to fly. And so there's a storm, and instead of going around, they decide to climb to like 40-something thousand feet and climb over the storm. And so he pulls back on the stick, and the plane starts climbing. And he pulled back too far, and the plane got into an aerodynamic stall, which is when your angle of attack gets too big, you stop creating lift, and then your plane just starts falling. And what you need to do to get out of that is you need to nose down, gain airspeed, and then flatten back out again. So he, again, inexperienced, pulls back, the alarm goes off, pulls back further, because I forget why he didn't trust the alarm. And as the plane got even steeper, then the alarm goes off. They were so steep, the alarm shut back off. So he's like, oh yeah, see, it's a buggy alarm. Like, I don't trust it.
And boy, am I being held back in this seat a lot.
Right? The pilot wakes up and the pilot, comes back in. He's like, what's going on? The guy's like, oh, the stall alarm was buggy or whatever.
Hold on. He's going straight up and the pilot walks into the cabin. Wait,
I don't know if it was straight up, but it was steep enough where the alarm stopped triggering.
So you're saying the pilot climbed back up to the cabin.
Well, keep in
what's
mind,
going on.
When you're dropping, gravity's not so much a problem. Because now you're free falling in the stall. So, you may not be terminal velocity, but yes, you can walk up a vertical thing when you're falling at the same rate as the plane.
Wow.
So they're at almost 40,000 feet. So they actually have like 2 minutes before they slam into the ocean. So there is time. The pilot comes in, they start arguing. He's like, what's going on? And part of the issue too is in Boeing aircraft, you have a little stick that both pilots have a stick that's connected. So when one pilot pulls back on the control stick, the other stick does the exact same thing. Whatever you do with the controls, pilot or co-pilot, you both have to do the same thing. And so even if your eyes are closed, if you're just holding it, you can actually feel what's going on and you get feedback. In the Airbus, it's a little joystick off to the right. It's not a stick between your legs, and they're not connected. There's no kind of feedback. So you have to pay attention to the instruments or ask the co-pilot or the pilot, what are you doing? You can't just feel what's going on with the stick.
I wouldn't even play Microsoft Flight Simulator without a force feedback joystick. Like how are they building airplanes with
you
this?
Take it up with Airbus.
Oh, wow.
So anyway, they're falling. And by the time they finally, the pilot's like, no, push down, like nose down. And they're arguing about this. And so finally he convinces the co-pilot, like, no, like we are in a stall. We probably only have seconds before impact. You have to nose down, gain airspeed so we can regain control of the plane. They did nose down, and they nosed down straight into the ocean and killed everyone on board. So they had 2 minutes to work with. So when you're in a self-driving car, if you're going to hit something, you're probably not going to have maybe 2 or 3 seconds if you're lucky. And then you're slamming into whatever it is. You're not going to have minutes to gain context. So I actually wanted to put out a call to some of our Code Day kids, a little bit of a language warning, but I wanted to rip off the name from Mitch Hedberg has a skit. And I wanted to make a game titled Good Luck Fucker. And it would be a take on a racing game. And so the idea is that the screen would be black, just totally black. Normally you start a racing game where you're sitting at a spot and there's a light counting down. And then when it goes and hits green, then you go, right? And so you have context. You see where the other cars are. You have a few seconds to gain context before you start racing. Well, what I want a simulator to show to legislators and other tech people who are all on this autonomous vehicle and safety driver bullcrap. Black screen, variable delay from 10 to like 45 seconds, randomly chosen each time you start the game. And it just counts down. And you don't see a countdown timer. It counts down. You don't know when the screen's going to go live. And then at some point it just goes live and you're already moving at some speed on some street in some vehicle. And you have to try to not hit things. And that's why the name, Mitch Hedberg, the good luck fucker. Like, let's see if you can not hit stuff. And that's the experience of a safety driver. If you're not driving, you don't have context for what's going on. And your brain is going to naturally tune out and lose that context. And you're not going to have enough time, not only the reaction time, you don't even know what the right reaction is going to be until you've gained situational contextual awareness. And then you can decide how to react. So there's going to be a contextual kind of learning period of several seconds, and then a reaction time thing, which will be minor compared to gaining context of what do I need to do. And this is also where people say, oh, we'll just have safety drivers like on a level 5 car, like the Zoox. We'll just have a call center of people just sitting and standing by. And then the car, if it gets into trouble, can just hand over to them. Okay, well, first of all, is the network reliable? What's the network latency? But that's the easy problem. Secondarily, just like I said, like, how are these people going to gain context? If you have some random call center full of X number of people that might need to take over and, Z number of cars, they don't know which car. Like, they can't be watching all the cars. They can't, unless they're remotely driving the vehicle, they won't have context. So when they get like immediately pulled into a car, like, how does that work? How do you get someone context and get them remote control of an autonomous vehicle quickly enough to get them to actually be able to avert the accident? I don't think that's possible. It's an insane idea.
Well, the good news with the Zoox is that They totally overcame that problem. They just got rid of the safety driver.
Yeah.
Now it's all software. But the problem with that is, how do you deal with something like this? This here is a hacked stop sign. And this hacked stop sign was interpreted by 100% of autonomous vehicles to be a 45 mile per hour speed limit sign. So I'll describe this for those of you who are listening, but essentially it's a normal stop sign with a couple of pixelated stickers that somebody stuck onto the stop sign. And the software that was used to interpret this stop sign by the autonomous vehicles, somehow it interprets it as a 45 mile per hour speed limit sign.
Well, describe it a little better. So it says, above it says love, and below it says hate. So it says like love, stop, hate, basically, if you read from top to bottom. And the love and the hate stickers are pixelated and distorted. So parts of the O and the V and the H and the A and the E and hate are specially chosen patterns of black pixels versus white. And what we've actually recently found, there was a study that just came out, computer vision systems tend to cue in on patterns, on textures, much more than shapes. So whereas a person just needs to see a red octagon and be like, oh, that's a stop sign, even if all the words fell off, if you see an octagon, it's a stop sign. The shape is enough. The red is, secondarily enough. There's all kinds of redundant information sources that a human can see a stop sign. And no matter how much you deface it, short of like cutting the stop sign into a different shape and changing the color, you're still going to be like, that's a stop sign. And then just the placement of the stop sign. If it's at an intersection, you're probably going to be like, well, wait a minute. That looks like someone really like defaced the heck out of that stop sign. So you're going to have to do a lot short of like completely changing out the sign to get to fool a human into thinking a stop sign is a speed limit sign. But in autonomous, yeah.
You also got to wonder, like, why isn't all of that just built into the software? I mean, like, I would have imagined the software being like, it's an octagon, probably a stop sign. Oh, it's red, almost definitely a stop sign. And then does it say stop anywhere on it? Oh, I'm absolutely sure that this is a stop sign, but yet a couple of stickers that say love and hate. And I think it's interesting that it says love, stop, hate there, because that also seems to give it some social disguise, because it does look just like some of the normal stickers that people stick on stop
Which doesn't
signs.
cause any problem for humans. But see, you're thinking of it as a computer science engineer, computer software engineer. You're not thinking of it in the context of programming a machine learning system where you're not directly encoding rules, and you can't yet ask it, how are you determining whether it's a stop sign versus a speed limit sign versus a yield sign, etc. We can't interrogate these systems. All we can do is throw more examples at them. And we don't know what features. There's a thing called LIME, and LIME is still early research, and LIME can kind of sort of brute force its way through showing you what it's actually queuing in on. But we don't know. We don't actually know. We're just dumping data in and saying, well, 98% of the time it recognized stop signs, right? And 98% sounds pretty good. But think about it. If you have self-driving cars on every road around the US and they're driving, how many hours a day, 2% failure rate is like hundreds of thousands of failures every day.
Yeah, well, why can't it be both? Why does it have to be only machine learning? Why can't it be an augmented system with classical programming where you're just like, hey, does it have an octagon? Is it a red octagon? I am 95% sure that this is a stop sign. And it takes a lot more evidence from both the machine learning side and from other things in order to convince it that it's not a stop sign, just like a human would. I mean, come on, like why
that's an ongoing debate. That is literally an ongoing debate in machine learning circles is, can you ever get anywhere near human levels of thought without causation and symbolic manipulation?
Well, I mean, think of our own minds for a minute, right? Mm-hmm. We don't use only pattern recognition for determining our next course of action. That is one part of our decision-making system. We might look at the thing, go, well, it's a stop sign. Hey, it's an octagon and it's red. That's our pattern recognition, right? But we also might be like, but there's nobody coming. I might as well go. And like, and I'm not saying I do that, but I'm just saying, like, humans, we have a logical side to it as well. And we look at context as well. And like you said, I'd be like, well, I'm at an intersection. If you're in the middle of nowhere late at night and there's nobody coming, you might roll a little slower, but then keep going, and I'm just saying, pattern recognition is not the only thing there is. So why would there be an argument that we should rely entirely on pattern recognition?
I'm trying to find this article. State of computer vision. We're really far away. I think I found it. I'm going to have you bring that up. Here we are. Let me have you bring this up. So this is the irony, is we talk about deep learning, and the irony is right now, if you can bring that up for us, deep learning is actually very shallow. And so, like you're saying, we have multiple layers we can not just identify the stop sign using a number of different kind of methods, a number of different knowledge sources and things to pull from, but we can also identify the situation, and we could say, oh, well, there's like no cars. So I can go a level deeper and say, it doesn't really matter if I stop right now, because the whole idea of the stop sign is to make sure we take some caution and don't hit other cars. If there's no other cars, I'm not going to hit other cars whether I stop or not, so there's no need to stop. And we can actually understand the rules and everything several levels deep behind these things, whereas self-driving deep learning is very shallow. It's just seeing patterns. And a lot of this stuff, there's been some great examples where they did a gender. They tried to guess the gender of the picture, and it seemed like it was working really well. But in the training data, they had a lot of business people. I don't know, stock photos or what. And then they threw a picture of I think a woman in a cosplay thing with a tie on, like a necktie. And it's like, oh, it's a man. And they're like, oh, it's looking at the necktie to assess gender. It's not actually looking at anything about the face. It's just every picture we've shown with a man is wearing a tie, and every picture without a tie is a woman. So it's actually looking for a necktie detection. It's not actually doing gender.
So in our chat, Angry Knees said that he doesn't think that it's not technically possible, but that we might not have a model for that kind of hybrid computation. He says it strikes him as not as a we don't want to, but as a we don't know how to. But it sounded to me like you were saying that the argument is, can we do this all with machine learning without any classical programming? And I'm guessing is that the actual argument? Are there people who are just champions of ML and they just don't want to program normally?
Well, there's so many edge cases that, we can't do this with classical programming. I mean, building up that rule set would take a lifetime. And we can't do it with machine learning either in its current form, because it's not sophisticated enough. And if you can pull up that article I sent in our behind the scenes chat, it's a Karpathy article about the state of computer vision. It's from years ago, but it still applies.
We'll get to that in a second. But
no, we can't. There's too many different scenarios. Look at weather. And this is another thing that these self-driving cars have a problem with. If there's a snowstorm, if you can't see any road markings because there's snow all over the road, how do you stay within your lane?
So you're saying that these systems might take like 20 years to program, and well, isn't that about how long it takes for you to make a good driver out of a baby? You have to teach them pattern recognition. You got to teach them.
It's going to take a lot longer.
Well, maybe because we don't have as sophisticated of hardware as a human being, but my point is that even a human being, if you're trying to teach them how to drive a car from being a baby, it's going to take you like 20 years for them to be a good driver. Like most drivers are not that great, even at 18, at 16, and maybe some of them are decent. But the point is that you have a lot of prerequisite training to get up to that point. Why are we thinking that we're going to somehow figure out a way to design some sort of system that is better than a human at performing this task? What kind of wishful thinking is that?
It's just like the first time, before the first AI winter, where we thought making human level intelligence on a computer would be easy. And we're being shown for the second or third time that there is a heck of a lot going on in a human brain. And part of the reasons we can't even given 20 plus years, we can't do this, is the models we have right now for computer intelligence are not sophisticated enough. They're not even they're not even close. If you look at some of the deep convolutional neural nets that were super trendy and thankfully fading a little bit, although still popular, like there are researchers on record saying, like, oh, this will solve everything. We just throw more data at it. This will solve all the problems. It'll figure all the things out. And it's like, that's bull crap. It doesn't even do the things that you think it does well. People don't understand. We talk about nines of reliability. Like I said, people don't understand how insanely accurate you'd need this to be. We're just looking at, in our test set, we hit 99.99% accurate. Great in your test set. But in the real world, when you have this stuff deployed at, national scale, if not global, that 0.001% is actually going to be a lot of deaths. Because if these are driving millions of hours a day all over the world, just take 0.001 of millions. It's a big number. The law of big numbers. Like, it has to be damn near perfect, not 99.99%. Like, if you don't want to be killing people left and right, your system better be 99.9999999% accurate minimum, or you're going to be killing people left and right. And that's in one area, and errors compound. When you start pulling in all the different ways these systems mess up, you're going to have a really high failure rate.
What really blows my mind about this is how, you remember when we were playing Computer Chronicles on Automate All the Things?
Yeah.
And there's actually a machine learning episode on there where in the 80s, they were claiming that they're going to have generalized AI within 20 years.
Yep.
And we still haven't got there. We're not even close to getting there. And yet we still have people who are just still chasing that, going, yeah, it's just 20 years away. All right, I'm going to bring up this image.
They're making a lot of money saying that. It markets really well. The public isn't well versed on the limitations of machine learning. And I'm trying to pull up. Is it in the Hacker Laws database? There's a wonderful Git repo called Hacker Laws. And there's a law of automated machines that I'm blanking on the name right now, that basically stuff that's super, super hard for people to do, like playing chess, is trivial to automate even without machine learning. Remember, Deep Blue beat Kasparov well before the era of machine learning. And it was just basically brute forcing the entire problem space of chess. And so things that we consider really difficult and intellectual and hard for people turn out to be trivial to solve with computers. And things that are trivial for even like 4-year-old children to solve are actually insanely difficult and well beyond the capability of even the most advanced machine learning systems. And yeah, none of this is new. Like you're mentioning, in the 80s, I believe it was 1975 or right around there, when the convolutional neural net and the idea of back propagation to train it, I believe that's about when that was invented. And the reason it didn't catch on is because we didn't have systems that had enough processing power, enough memory. And the bigger issue, we didn't have enough pre-trained, pre-labeled data. These things are really dumb and slow to learn. And as I was going to mention earlier, they have these, neural nets that are playing video games, and they're like, oh, look, it plays video games way better than any human. And then it's like, okay, but how long did it take to learn that? And you ask about the training time, and they're like, oh, well, we just ran it with, like 500,000 hours of gameplay. And you're like, that's like 5 or 10 lifetimes of playing that video game. I could sit an 8-year-old kid in front of this thing for a week, and he'll be pretty good. Not as good as your thing, but it'll only take him a week of playing the game. It won't take him like 10 lifetimes to get to that level. So the training speed on these things is abysmal. They're really dumb. They do pick out patterns, but very slowly.
Well, 3 things. First is that I was under the impression, because of some of the long time machine learning researchers had said that we had the CPU and we had the algorithms back in the 80s to do most of the things that we're doing today. It was really just the data sets, the size of the data that was holding us back. And that really this breakthrough of machine learning today came about because we have read speeds and size of drives, large enough to make these useful. But
and pre-labeled data. We've all been clicking Google's CAPTCHA and sharing all our personal photos with it.
That was the second point, which is Sakello says that machines should know what a stop sign looks like because he's entered enough CAPTCHAs. You know, good
Indeed,
point,
Sakello. Indeed. Although, you know what's terrifying? The other day, I had one of these stupid CAPTCHAs, this Google reCAPTCHA, and it's like, choose all the images with the school bus. And so I'm like, all right, fine, click, click, click. And I'm like, okay. And it's like, nope, choose all of the images with the school bus. And I'm like, I did. What are you talking about? And there's one image of a 53-foot white semi-trailer. And I'm like, it's not a school bus. That's why I didn't click it.
Yeah.
But I'm like, you know what? Screw it. Someone's going to die, but click there. That's a school bus. And it's like, yeah, now you got it. So the training data that Google's using there's errors in it. I know because I wish I had screenshot. There's 2 of those where I've done in the last 3 weeks. I have had to choose the wrong thing because other people have quickly and sloppily clicked, and Google's using this data that is mislabeled to train their systems.
Well, this brings to my third point that I wanted to make was that when Deep Blue did play Garry Kasparov in, what was it, 96? Kasparov did win twice out of 6 games. So just something to keep in mind, that even if you play 50,000 lifetimes worth of chess, Garry Kasparov still won twice. And that's pretty impressive. All right. So we only have about 9 minutes. So I do want to get on to this image that you had sent over. But in about 5 minutes, can you explain to me, because there's way too much text on this article that you sent over to understand it. But I'll bring up the picture. If you can describe this picture to those who are just listening at home and explain why this is interesting.
I've done this many times. This is one of my go-to articles, and it's still... So this article is The State of Computer Vision and AI. We're really far away is the title. And it's a picture of a number of years ago, President Obama, and then some other, I'm guessing congressmen. I don't recognize some of the other gentlemen in the image. And there's one of them standing on a scale, on like a medical scale like you get at the doctor's office. And he's setting the little balance weights to take his weight. And they're standing in a locker room, it looks like. And so there's several mirrors reflecting them. And so like a human, if you're looking at this and looking at all the parts of this picture, besides just classifying there's this many people, well, first off, you have to understand that mirrors reflect people, and that there's 2 images of Obama in this picture. And the one on the left is a reflection of him. And there's some other people and some other faces in that mirror. Those aren't real people. And there's another face or 2 on the right. And those aren't real people. Those are reflections of people in the image. And then while this gentleman's standing on the scale, Obama is, being a little cheeky. He's got his toe on the back of the scale. And so you have to understand several things to get why this picture is funny. And everyone's smiling. So you could tell he's playing a joke on this guy who's weighing himself. And you need to understand that, first of all, people weigh something, that people don't like to weigh more than they weigh. They like to seem lighter than heavier. You also have to understand how a scale works, and that putting more weight, like him putting his toe on it, is going to add weight, which is going to make the reading inaccurate, which is going to make this person confused that they seem to weigh more than they should, and which is why everyone else is seeing this happening. You have to have theory of mind and say, oh, all these other men in the picture are laughing because he's tricking this guy. So there's a lot, and you could keep going deeper and deeper, but there's a lot of stuff that basic computer vision cannot dissect, all these levels of meanings. It can classify, I see this many individuals in this picture, and it'll probably botch that because the mirrors, and who knows, maybe they fix that in later stuff. But going levels deep and saying this is a funny image, which is actually, who was that pointed out in the chat? Angry Knees. I love ML can beat any human player in Go, but we don't have a reliable way to tell when someone is being an obvious dick in a text chat. And like, yeah, and that's kind of like this image. Like, can you classify like a humor detector? Could you say, why is this image funny? And we are nowhere near being able to throw random images at a computer system and say, oh, that image is hilarious, because you have to go multiple levels deep. And there's so much extra knowledge you need to be able to assess whether the image is fun. First of all, what's going on? And then secondarily, is that funny? And this is the problem with self-driving cars. When you look at a streetscape and you look at the edge cases, like when it's snow, when there's fog, when there's rain, when it's Halloween and people are dressed in weird costumes. You've optimized this thing to see humans, human-shaped humans. And on Halloween, everyone's walking around totally different shapes, wearing all kinds of crazy costumes. Does your system still avoid and not run into these people? And in the real world, there's all these edge cases. What if the sensors get dirty? That's another thing. Do you do quorum sensors? So if some mud or a bird, you're driving and a seagull poops and it spats on the sensor, and now the sensor's blinded. Do you have secondary sensors that are able to still see? And if so, now what accuracy did you lose by having your LiDAR knocked out? Can you still drive reliably if the camera or the LiDAR or one of the other sensors is knocked out? There are so many edge cases. And the one I want to talk about briefly, since we're running out of time here, is even if all that was perfect, one thing that when we were doing some advisory work for the Arizona state legislators there, we were talking to them about self-driving cars. They were talking about legislating and allowing, because we were very, very friendly to self-driving cars. And we went in and we said, you should be less friendly. Don't say no, but make sure we understand that they have responsibilities that they need to be very serious about. And one of these things is assuming all the rest of this is perfect, assuming you somehow magically have a perfect AI that never screws up. Okay, Arizona, we routinely hit 118, 120 degrees Fahrenheit during the summer, which I think we've occasionally hit 50 degrees Celsius for those that are, not from the US. And they're like, oh my God, nope, that happens. Not often, but it does happen. So when you see these PSAs about don't leave your pets or kids in the car, it can get really hot in 15 minutes. If you run out of power in a car in Arizona in the summer, it can get deadly hot in 5 or 10 minutes. It doesn't take 15. Like within 30 minutes, plastic will be melting, things that need to be not just refrigerated, but as a kid, if you ever left an action figure in a car in Arizona, forgot to take it in with you, and you come back and he's just like a pile of melted goo, you learn the power of the heat in Arizona. So if you have a self-driving vehicle and you are putting your kid in there, or someone who's not capable of taking care of themselves, let's say a 6-year-old, you don't want the 6-year-old to be able to, you want to put them in the car seat and buckle them up. If there's an accident, you don't want them bouncing all over the car. You want them safely protected by the car seat. So with a young child, you're not going to have a car seat where it's not like a racing seat belt where you yank the thing and the harness comes off really quickly so you can get out of a vehicle rapidly. You're not going to want them to be able to get out of the seat. So if the car hits some piece of road debris, the batteries are damaged, and it has to do an emergency shutdown at the side of the road, you now have an unpowered car on the side of the road in 120 ambient degrees, rapidly rising in temperature. In a normal car, you're going to get over there and it's going to start to get hot. And the adult, whoever's driving the car, is going to get out, take the kid out of the car seat and try to find some shade, or try to walk somewhere else where it's not so blisteringly hot. But there is more to being a driver in a vehicle than just driving the vehicle. And this is one of the most fundamental things that all these proponents of self-driving cars are like, oh, you don't need to know how to drive. You don't need to have a capable person. You just get in, you just tell it where you want to go. Even if everything else is perfect, you're going to kill people, because there are cases when you need someone who can do other things besides just driving the car present to avert disaster. There's always another failure case, and that's what makes me really nervous. And there's so much more we could go into, but we're almost out of time. So we'll have to make this a multi-part. But until we really think all of this stuff through, there's just too many edge cases to trust these things. They're too dang dangerous.
Well, we always seem to end these shows on such a positive, bright point, don't we? There's certainly a lot more to talk about when it comes to these autonomous cars. You brought up a bunch of points I had never thought of before. I love this image of Obama standing on the scale. It's first off, it's a great image, but second off, it really does. As a programmer, if you try to think through, well, how would I recognize these things with code? You recognize that this right here is a litmus test. This is an extremely difficult image to process context out of, and it really does show us just how far away we are from understanding the context of a situation so we can react appropriately to it, or even classify what is happening in it. And that to me, is one of the scariest implications when it comes to the self-driving cars. Because if we can't figure out what's going on in this image, then how are we supposed to figure out what's going on in 60 frames a second of those kinds of images, or 120 of those every second? You know, that's what it takes in order to have these cars be safe. So my guess is that with this Amazon car that's coming out, the Zoox, you know, it's probably going to be one of those deals where we have to sort of Zoox-proof the route that it's taking, and it's not going to be able to go wherever it wants to go. Because if we can't figure out this image, how are we supposed to figure out just any random road where people could stick stickers onto stop signs and make you think it's a speed limit sign? So
and there's worse, but that, to me, that's the bar. You show me a vision system that can explain whether that image is funny and other images, then we can start talking level 5. Until you can show me that capability, level 5's not a thing. And please don't try to trick people into thinking it actually can exist until we have that capability.
Unfortunate. Well, everybody, that brings us to the end of our show today, but we will have another show recording on Wednesday. So tune in for that, and also subscribe to the podcast where we publish the audio of all of these shows on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. We'd like to do a special thanks to Andromedon VR for being our second subscriber. That is super great. Awesome to have you here. Great to have you as a listener and viewer. And for everybody else listening at home, thank you very much for joining us today. This was Code and Chaos, and we will see you next time. Take care.